Abe Lincoln won the 1860 election, indicating that slavery should be banned from the western states. The South did not condone any moral ambiguity of slavery and was outraged that Lincoln was elected. Southern states started seceding before he was inaugurated. The South claimed to be the injured party and mobilized for war. They could have succeeded if they weren't defeated militarily. So they started a war by shelling Fort Sumter. Granted, they were militaristic, but politically, that was the last thing they should have done. On the plus side, they had better military leadership and did well on the battlefield. Lack of food, along with related starvation and diseases, were major causes of their ultimate defeat. The moral issues of slavery are clear. People are not property. I live in Texas, but my great-grandfather was a rancher in Minnesota. He was an infantry sergeant during the war, one of 22,000. The 1st Minnesota Infantry Volunteer Regiment halted a Confederate assault at Gettysburg. The focus is food, but there are several other relevant topics: fighting the war, financing the war, sanitation, and disease, which proved more fatal than fighting. Battles are not my bailiwick, but can't be ignored. Ken Burns did a terrific documentary on the war. Some of the key fights included Bull Run, Antietam, Gettysburg, Vicksburg, Sherman's March, then the surrender at Appomattox. Over 600,000 troops died. Total casualties probably topped 1.5 million. This former riverboat captain from Missouri, named Sam Clemens, answered the call to defend the state as a Marion Ranger, that is, from Marion County. Without training, none of the troops obeyed orders. The mention of Union troops resulted in immediate attempts to retreat. That lasted about 2 weeks. Sam snuck off to a sister's house and was soon on his way west, ending his less than glorious military career. He decided to take up journalism and fiction using the pen name Mark Twain. Desertion seemed to have been the right call. Both sides were cocky at the start, claiming great resources and quick victory. War departments and quartermasters claimed to supply adequate rations for the troops: a pound of bread or flour, a pound of meat, salted pork the most common, dried vegetables or beans, coffee, sugar, salt, pepper, and spices, plus a couple of quarts of water. Add rye bread, canned food, and potatoes for the North, cornmeal, apples, and sweet potatoes for the South. Picture cooks preparing hot meals from kettles and frying pans. This was a reasonable description for Union troops in camp, preferably well behind enemy lines, less so for the Confederacy. Union troops ate reasonably well most of the time. There was plenty of food, much of it coming from the Great Plains. The major food problems were because of incompetent logistics, transportation disruptions, including Confederates taking commissary wagons. Meals prepared in buildings or mess tents were limited. Cooks usually prepared coffee, served with sugar, meat by the slice, bread, perhaps a potato, served in the soldiers' met kit and cup, who washed and put them in their haversacks. Boxes and barrels served as tables. Actual provisions were written about in soldier diaries, letters, and by visiting journalists. Actual food was not up to expectations. Hardtack was common, especially on marches. Live worms could be found. Canned food could be rancid or worse. Dried vegetables were issued, with troops complaining, what in heaven's name was it composed of? None of us ever discovered. Provisioners were often corrupt or incompetent. Soldiers received delicacies from home like chocolate, canned foods and condensed milk, cheese, or cake. Civilian volunteers brought provisions to camps. Settlers were civilian merchants selling provisions to the soldiers in the field or camps, usually from the back of a wagon or tent. As troop followers, settlers could supply almost anything, but at inflated prices. Common Confederate soldier rations included a pint of cornmeal and a quarter-pound of bacon. Corn, peanuts, and jerky were on the march foods. Other possibilities included cornbread, hardtack, peas, and sorghum. Soups and stews were made of beans, black-eyed peas, and cornbread, ways to make unsavory food palatable. Rations got worse over time, with the South having some difficulty with growing food and transportation facilities that went from bad to worse. Overseas provisions only came from blockade runners, which were only moderately successful. Adequate meat was seldom provided. Mule and horse meat were likely eaten, as they died by the thousands during the war. There were recipes for roasted rat with bacon grease. They learned to cook and eat rancid foods. Foraging was widely practiced. Hunger does that. Union provisions were a favorite target. Fields were raided for corn and peas. Coffee was replaced by brewing chicory, acorns, or anything else somewhat resembling coffee. One reason for the Gettysburg campaign was foraging for provisions, with cavalry roaming up to 50 miles from the battle site. At that, they were somewhat successful. The battles resulted in a Union victory and Confederate retreat. So many more topics need to be covered. We'll continue in part 2 next time on food, history, and mystery.